Hello, everybody. I think this just got started. People are going to start popping in. So we're going to give it a few seconds to let everybody actually get into the webinar itself. As I'm watching the attendees, the participants list, it keeps growing a little bit. So we're just going to let this continue to pop for a few seconds here. Looks like we have a really nice turnout tonight. So that's great. We're very excited about the project. So glad all of you are able to make it. I don't know about you, but it almost seems like we should have some music or something at this point, just kind of playing in the background. I'm showing 6:04 on my clock. I think at 6:05 we'll get started. There's some housekeeping stuff and things of that nature that I can get into, and people will be able to join as they keep coming in. All right, well, I'm showing 6:05, so I say we get started. Thank you everyone for coming. This is a great turnout. We're very excited about it. My name's Craig Nicholson. I'm the Director of Real Estate Acquisitions at Justice Start. And this is the first community meeting for 52 New Street. We're excited to have everyone here. As I think I've said a couple of times now, And I want to take care of just one housekeeping thing before we get into the meat of the presentation. This presentation is being recorded. The recording will be made available on our Co-Urbanize website, which is 52newstreet.org. If in addition to the recording, we'll also be posting a recap of all the question and answers that will take place throughout the presentation. That being said, if you'd like to ask a question, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question in the box and hit send. The panelists, myself, and our partners from Roti Architects, Ben Wan and Rashmi Ramaswamy, and I will be able to see the questions of everybody, and we'll go through and answer as many as we can in the time that we have, and any that we don't get to will also be part of the posting of the wrap up of the Q&A. You can submit a question anytime you want. We'll try to get to them if it's urgent at that moment, or try and keep them all at the end, but feel free to stream of conscious and type your questions as they come up. All right, now that we've gotten that out of the way, if we go to the next slide, Ben. Excellent. I just mentioned that we have our architects, Ben Wan and Rashmi, with us. And they'll be in charge of the latter part of the presentation. But what we're going to do first is give a brief introduction into Just Start. Ideally, everybody knows who we are at this point in Cambridge, but we always want to make sure that we cover that base. We're going to talk a little bit about the process for the affordable housing overlay. And then we're going to go into the project goals. Actually, we're going to hit the Roti presentation and then come back to the timeline. So we're going to hop a little bit out of order there, but for the most part, we're going to be right on schedule here. And if we go to the next slide. All right, Just to Start at a glance. Just Start's a 52, going on 53-year-old organization. We started as an offshoot of the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority and a program there. We have 45 employees, 15 board members. We serve Cambridge primarily, and then also the Metro North communities. And really, you know, being a part of Cambridge for this long, we've really been able to fine tune our vision and our mission, where our vision is an equitable community where everyone can secure a solid economic foundation. And that really is, you know, the driving force of our mission, to promote equity by creating access to stable housing and building pathways to economic opportunity. And we do this in a number of ways. Next slide. So the first, and what we're kind of here talking about today, is stable housing. You know, having that base, building affordable housing, supplying a rental pool and maintaining our affordable housing, expanding home ownership opportunities and renovating properties. This is, you know, kind of that foundation from which people can feel that sense of security, feel that ability to have that path to economic opportunity with that secure base of being in a stable housing situation. Next slide. We also provide additional services to our residents and broader Cambridge through our resident services programs, as well as our financial opportunity program, where we have workshops and tax preparation and individual coaching. So again, really helping not only our residents, but Cambridge as a whole and the broader community that we serve to understand these concepts and have that understanding of how to get to that financial stability that's part of our mission. Next slide. When we start going past the housing and that base and really start looking at the economic opportunity, we focus on this through our education and training program. And this is done for adults through career programs, certificate career programs in the biomedical fields and IT fields. And next slide. And we also do this for youth. We are an affiliate of Youth Build, which is an organization that helps teens gain the skills and a high school credential when the normal or standard educational system didn't fit with their life and their skills. And so it's really a great way for them to get that high school equivalency, but also get life skills and job skills and financial skills in the construction field as well as the retail customer service field. And next slide. So that's just a start. I try to keep it brief because again, we've been around for 52 years, so I'm hoping everybody knows us, but in case you didn't, that's us at a high level. The next thing I wanted to talk about in relation to 52 New Street is the affordable housing overlay that has been enacted at the end of last year. 52 New Street is one of, if not the first project going through the process. And, you know, we want to highlight some of the key components of that process because it's a little different than other zoning processes and a little more prescribed. And we just want to make sure that people are aware of it and highlight where we are in the process and make sure you understand the opportunities you'll have to comment and provide feedback and as we go through this. So I've broken this down kind of into two broad components. The first is the community meeting process. And we're at the first meeting. This is where we are today, where we are sharing the site and the street context of the neighborhood with the residents and other interested parties, and eliciting feedback in regards to, you know, kind of how we're viewing the neighborhood and the context, and making sure that we are capturing things that the community is wanting to make sure we address as part of our design and our plan. The next meeting, the second meeting, third meeting is really where we start showing the buildings that we think can go there, getting more specific comments on design from the public, and then incorporating that and then presenting again, and kind of that iterative process of showing where your feedback is helping drive what ultimately gets built here. Next slide. The other component is the public meeting process. Now with the overlay, as you may well be aware, that there's certain things that are already approved in terms of zoning and setbacks and heights and so on and so forth, but there still is an actual public meeting process. We submit a package to the planning board where they do a design consultation, where they look at the design guidelines that are built into the overlay and then provide us feedback, which we again go back, take a look at where we can incorporate those and come back to the planning board, where they will eventually issue a final report that goes to the Affordable Housing Trust. Next slide. So for just to start, whenever we start a new project, we set out some goals, and that's where we're talking about now is the goals for 52 New Street. And these are the goals that are not only tied to our mission, but also things that address specifics of each site that we embark in. So for example, a goal for us is to expand affordable housing, family housing opportunities in Cambridge. That's a key part of our mission. But other goals that are more related to this site are, how do we integrate into Danahy Park? Because it's such a unique thing to have as your neighbor. How do we create an engaging frontage on New Street? It's a neighborhood that's in transition. It's going from industrial to more residential, and we want to make sure that what we build there kind of is in line with city guidelines and ambitions for planning and design, but also, you know, something that really allows people to feel that our building should be on that street and part of the neighborhood. A big thing for Just to Start in and of itself, it's not necessarily part of our mission beyond just the stable and secure housing, is how do we look at this site and improve it from a climate and resiliency standpoint? So we want to make sure that we're doing our part to have buildings that don't create huge carbon footprints, that don't make things unsafe in terms of a resiliency standpoint. You know, we want to make sure that the living conditions for the people that come into our building are the best that they can be. And for this project in particular, being one of the first of the overlays, we want to make sure that people understand that the process can work. The overlay process will work, and ultimately what we end up here will be a thoughtful and attractive building that incorporates the feedback of the community and moves through the process smoothly so that everyone feels really good about what Cambridge has been able to do to address the housing crisis. Next slide. So with those goals in mind, we also take a look at some of the parameters that are allowed to be built from a zoning standpoint. And we look at what the overlay allows, and we look at what Envision Cambridge kind of wants us to do. And then we kind of come up with a vision for what we think is going to go here that meets those things, but also meets the goals and the mission of Just a Start. So for 52 New Street, looking at that stuff, kind of the vision, we're looking at about 110 apartments. We expect that 75%, if not more, will have 2 or 3 bedrooms, so larger family size units. And for this many units, we really want to make sure that we have a mix of incomes so that we're not, all at one end or all at another end. So, it's going to be a range from people that are very low income, less than 30% of area median income, AMI, up to some that are even for people that are making, an income that is at the area median income. We'll also provide 6 fully accessible apartments of various sizes so that people with disabilities are accommodated and welcomed into the community. And for this site and this area, we expect a small commercial space to be available as part of the building as well. So that's kind of our vision for what we're thinking of putting here. But right about now, we're still at this stage where we're talking about street context and site constraints and things of those natures, and we want to share those with you. And so for that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Ben, and he'll start working through the aspects of that and where their design inspiration is coming from.
Okay. Thank you, Craig. As mentioned, my name is Ben Wan, and I'm an associate with Rohde Architects. I'm on the project team for 52 New Street. Eric Robinson's principal, and Rashmi Wamasamy is also on with me on the panel to answer any questions as well. So Rohde's based in the south end of Boston. We're about 15 years old. Our work spans across many typologies, but we have a particular focus on multifamily housing. And we are especially excited by projects such as this, where we get to pair with sort of mission-driven designers and Just a Start in this goal of bringing affordable housing to this corner of Cambridge. So really exciting project, and I'm very happy that we have such a great turnout here to share the content that we've been developing so far. So as Craig mentioned, this presentation is going to focus a lot around a part of Rohde's process that sometimes we don't get to share as much. So it's this great opportunity that the city's given us to really show the way that we love to dive into sort of the context of the neighborhood and the city and understand really well what the fabric of the neighborhood is and where we're inserting these projects. So far, having the Co-Urbanized website up has been fantastic, so we can hear some of your initial questions and concerns for the site. Questions about multimodal transit and pedestrian and bike connectivity. The idea that we're looking to make sure that this neighborhood, which is sort of in transition, maybe we even picked up that it's unremarkable in some particular ways, but how we can use our project to sort of create an identity, how we can use our project to ensure that there's safety and sort of a sense of place as we're bringing this new family-based housing. Certainly, as we get through this analysis and we start to understand kind of the scale of the neighborhood, the fabric and the character of the neighborhood, we're making sure that we're finding ways to make this building, which will have a certain sort of scale in order to provide this number of affordable housing units, that we can make it sort of knitted into the fabric of the neighborhood and really see that it's a part of the place and also a part of the vision for what the neighborhood can be. So this sort of overview, I'll take you, first we'll start at sort of site analysis very broadly, looking at where the site sits within Cambridge, then focusing more closely onto the site itself, the existing conditions and sort of the constraints that are existing around the site. Zooming back again a little bit more then to look at the kind of street context and what are the immediate adjacencies and what are the pieces that are kind of informing directly abutting our site. And then last, there's a bit of sort of design inspiration and looking at all these existing conditions where we're finding a little bit of our roadmap looking ahead. So we're excited to show sort of what we're seeing, but we know that we have a ton of work to do from here as we're starting to develop this design, and we're really eager to hear your comments and your questions and your feedback. So diving right in, this first, the idea of where we are in Cambridge. So the little trapezoidal red site is 52 New Street. So first you'll notice that it's sort of long and thin. And when we get to the site, we'll get into some of the more specifics about where that is. But really what we're identifying is we're sort of at this moment of Cambridge where we're not in the traditional neighborhoods. It's not sort of the more densely settled residential, the leafy streets of Cambridge. Really, we're just sort of outside of that, but we're also not quite in the heart of what is really the heart of the Alewife district, which is the larger scale. It's lab buildings, it's large residential development, and there's all of that sort of happening and developing in the quadrangle and in the triangle to the north of the tracks by Alewife Station there. And what we've identified here, and the borders of these colors are always a little bit sort of gradient, and they're fungible, and they even may be sort of move from year to year, but there's this zone here that we're calling kind of a mixed use where there's various scales. There's new development that's coming up along sort of Bay Street, which is Bay State Road, which is just to our project rear. And really that's sort of the locus where we see our project kind of sitting. So what does that mean? We're seeing there some of that leafy kind of residential, the more traditional residential neighborhoods of Cambridge have a certain character and a certain quality, which is not our site, but is fairly proximate to our site. So that's something that we're sort of keeping in mind. More of our abutters are these sort of recent multifamily 3 and 4 story developments that are just to our project rear, where those are sort of maybe the future of multifamily development for the city. So towards our north and west, of course, there's the large Fresh Pound Mall in its current existing condition. So understanding just kind of the heft and the scale of what kind of development is there, or looking forward to the future, what maybe that could be going down the line. And what is particular about these two kind of zones of Cambridge coming together is that we're located in this kind of green corridor where the Danahy Fields and the Fresh Pond Reservoir create this kind of great network of both recreation, open space, all kinds of opportunities that we can see our project kind of tying into and leveraging to benefit the residents of our project. In terms of connectivity, our site is fairly well connected for vehicles. There's the proximate arterials of the Fresh Pond Parkway, the kind of dueling rotaries that along Concord Avenue, and then the Alewife Brook Parkway that takes you up and out to the suburbs or follow the Fresh Pond in towards the city. But also in terms of transit, there is some relatively good bus connection along Concord Ave into Harvard Square. There's the Alewife is somewhat proximate. It's about a 15-minute walk, a comfortable walk, but also a 6-minute bike ride from our site. So seeing that there's, while not ideal, I think there are some good sort of bike connections along the Alewife Brook Parkway up to the T station there. But also just from our site, there's plenty of immediate amenities, a variety of shopping, various sort of gas. So knowing that our corner of the city does have some sort of walkability to it, but really I think the huge benefit that we see as kind of rising above some of those other is our direct abutting against the Danahy Fields, but also just this network of recreation and open space paths and connections that are in our neighborhood. So from those existing conditions, there's sort of the vision and the plan for what Cambridge can be. And so we want to ensure that whatever our project is doing, it's tying into and it's sort of cohering with the vision that the city's set forth. So this is a map overall of the city. I think Cambridge has, certainly nationally, one of the best bicycle networks. And knowing that the plan for where our site is, so here zooming in, again, our site in red, our site wants to ensure that it's maintaining, protecting, maybe improving the bike lane along New Street. And then recognizing that there's this, again, just a great network of existing bike paths around the pond and around the fields. But then there is also a vision for future multimodal transit that's happening along here, the abandoned railway, just a bit to the west of our site. These slides we pulled out from a recent presentation with Envision Cambridge. And so ensuring that the project that we place here is keeping an eye towards the future. Here, the proposed open space network, understanding sort of that vision here, showing the future potential development of that abandoned railway. Bike and pedestrian connectivity. I think we are excited by the potential in some future of a potential new bike and pedestrian connection along the northeast edge of our site at the base of the fields there. And then also, sort of as I alluded to earlier, knowing that there could be this potential new street network in some future visioning where the Fresh Pond Mall becomes more of a sort of a new neighborhood in the city of Cambridge. That Envision Cambridge plan also sets together a great set of kind of design guidelines that I think we understand and that we know our project will have to deal with as well, from creating resilient and green infrastructure, ensuring that the sort of public realm of our project is both responding to the streetscape, is improving the conditions. As Craig mentioned, we're considering sort of a commercial space that can start to create that kind of liveliness at our street edge. And then there's a variety of architectural considerations that we know we need to embody with our project, where we're acknowledging building entries so that there's a safe sense of orientation and that there's a sense of arrival when you're arriving at the building. There's ways of breaking down the scale of a building so that it really creates sort of a human scale at the street, and then is more about the traditional rhythms of Cambridge on the upper levels, and then ensuring that our projects are leveraging their sort of size to fulfill some sustainability goals, such as photovoltaic arrays along the roof and protecting ground floor parking with active uses. So I think that's maybe a fairly quick but overview of where sort of the idea of where we are, city scale, and where we can tie into the vision of Cambridge more broadly. And so now we can dive closer in to look at the site itself. So the site is 50 New Street. We are fronting onto New Street, and its proportions are, we have a fairly narrow street frontage and a fairly deep site. So that already presents some sort of geometric constraints that we're having to consider. Again, to the northwest are the Denny Fields, that kind of great asset and really vast kind of recreational asset for the city. And so our proximity from the Rotary. So looking at the site itself, it's about 400 feet on average. You'll notice it's a trapezoid, so it ranges from it's an average of about 400 feet deep with about 125 feet of frontage. The site tapers from, these are topographic lines. If we were to take the Cambridge city base, we're at about 17, and it does dip down about 4 feet to just before the existing fitness center. And so that already presents in some ways a bit of a design constraint, where we're starting to think about how we're creating a site where there's some resiliency and stormwater issues, which I can get to in later slides. This slide also shows the fascinating condition of the Denny Fields, which are elevated about 16 feet above the New Street sidewalk. So when we're thinking about how our building is starting to be designed, we're knowing that maybe there's a relationship actually with the fields to some upper levels of our building, where so we can create some great synergies between the common spaces in our building and between the recreational fields to our north and east. There is a dashed line that I want to call to your attention here, which is references back to the history of the site, which we'll go into a little bit later in the presentation as well, that the fields were formerly a clay pit that was excavated for brick masonry, then was a landfill. Earlier last century, the landfill was capped with fill from the MBTA when they extended from Harvard out to Alewife. And then finally that cap of earth became a suitable covering for them to create these recreational fields. So that's why there's this sort of dramatic topographic change from sidewalk up to the fields level. And this dashed line indicates that there's a sort of estimated extent of where that landfill content may exist. So that's something that we're having to keep in mind as we're working with our civil engineer to ensure that sort of foundations are sturdy, that our groundscape is sort of protected and capped from the content that's below. One last element about the site itself is that there's a kind of a gravel path that loops around at grade around the fields. And that I know, I know people who are sometimes use that as recreation, as a jogging path or as a walking path, but it's actually a vent trench that is monitored by the city and by the maintenance of the former landfill. So those are all kind of, the varied existing constraints of the site. As I mentioned, the sort of topographic change does have some ramifications for resiliency and for stormwater management. So this is a snapshot from the Cambridge Flood Viewer. And this shows where, again, our site's going from about 17 down to 14. We're seeing that there is really some potential impact to our site from long-term sea level rise and from even projections for stormwater and for significant storm events. So the really right from the beginning, the concerns that we need to maintain and ensure that we're being aware of is that any of the ground floor program that are serving our site really does need to be lifted up away from the sidewalk. So any of the program spaces like like the lobby or the potential commercial space has to be lifted up, and under the potential maximum zoning height of 70 feet under the affordable housing overlay, there's kind of that constrains what we're allowed to do with our potential residential. So, excuse me. I do want to touch a bit on just the sort of practical ramifications of what the affordable housing lay allows us on this site. We are an industrial zone by base zoning, but the affordable housing overlay does permit to go up to, as mentioned, 70 feet and 6 stories. And that's really a means of enabling clients like Just to Start to be able to provide sort of a critical mass of affordable housing while leveraging sort of economies of scale and allowing something that feels, while larger than some of its surrounding buildings, is a scale that we feel can be made to feel contextual within neighborhoods, particularly here where the 70 feet is allowed in what is formerly an industrial district. So walking through some of, just to be clear about what the zoning allows, the floor FAR refers to a floor area ratio, and that is a way of zoning to manage the density of a site, where it's measuring the ratio of the built area of a building against the area of a site. So whereas the base zoning is a 1.5, there is no maximum FAR. Instead, the zoning prefers to use measures of height and of setbacks to constrict the density of the project. As mentioned, we're allowed 70 feet because we are potentially proposing a commercial space on the ground floor and 6 stories in building. And then the side yard and the rear yard, there's admittedly some complexity in how the industrial lot handles residential projects, but just to say concisely, we're allowed a 7.5 foot side yard setback and a 10-foot rear yard setback under the affordable housing overlay. The one last element I'd like to call attention is the 0.4 parking ratio, which has been determined as an appropriate ratio for parking for the residential use. That's not to say that the affordable housing overlay just sort of allows a sort of a box volume to be built on a site. There are these sort of careful prescriptions, careful guidelines that are outlined in the zoning that I think we hold dear as designers and as architects anyway, where we're ensuring that the building has a sort of a human scale to it, that entries are clearly delineated, and that, of course, we're ensuring that these projects, Just to Start is, as the long-term holders of these projects, they want to ensure that they are robust, well-performing buildings for the long run. So there's, I'm not sure if it was mentioned in the intro, but we're currently planning to design towards passive house guidelines for these affordable units. So it's ensuring just that the residents of these developments are provided with robust, solidly performing buildings for the long term. Stepping back just a bit then, understanding, I think, where we are in the city understanding the specific constraints of the site itself. Now turning our eyes just to sort of understand what we are seeing as the immediate context and how we can start to use that to inform our designs. So this aerial view, you'll see the Concord Ave, here the Rotary on Fresh Pond Parkway, new streets swooping up along this edge, and here's our site with the parking lot pitching down and then the existing gym on the site. You'll see the slope up towards Dennehy Fields, and then New Street itself as this kind of collection of what I'm calling a kind of legacy semi-industrial auto body shops, mixed use. There's a dance hall in this structure here just to our project south, but then farther up New Street, you see kind of the trajectory of where New Street may be headed, where there are these mid-level rise multifamily developments that's already starting to happen along this edge of the park. So our site, where it sits, as mentioned in the zoning, our industrial district kind of captures most of New Street. We are directly abutting to our project south, a residential C1A that has a mixed use overlay. And we've already seen kind of the implications of that in the multifamily developments that have been happening along the edge of Bay State Road. The Fresh Pond Mall, its own kind of zoning district, and then the great expanse of Dennehy Fields. The scale of the projects, of the structures that are kind of in our proximity, here along this edge of New Street, maybe alluding to the future of the street, whereas to our project south, we're sort of keeping in mind that we are abutting something that is kind of a smaller scale, 1- and 2-story mixed use structures to our south. And as that kind of reflects to us here, this is maybe kind of an abstract diagram, but it's looking at what the scale of facades are and what kind of the scale of the buildings are that are around our site, and making sure that our project, which will have kind of a heft and a density that's a bit larger than that, there's a way for us to start thinking about breaking down the massing, knowing that there's a way for us to create a language that is harmonious with the existing neighborhood. And with our eye to the future, thinking that potentially these projects, these sites to our south and west have the potential in the future to maybe be developed in a similar fashion as ours, and knowing that our project wants to be responsive and kind of setting up what can happen on those future sites. So in terms of connectivity, thinking back to those slides we saw from Envision Cambridge, and then now knowing about the kind of constraints of our site and the geometries that we're working with, for vehicular access, certainly we have the kind of narrow frontage along New Street that we're having to contend with. And knowing that we want to create a separation between cars, trucks, loading, thinking about how we can use the constraints that we have to leverage those into the conditions that we're hoping for. So keeping vehicles to the project south, we're thinking pushing pedestrians more towards the sort of north corner that has this connection with the fields and with the park, and even tying in, you see the green, which is showing recreation. The idea that this kind of edge of our site is responding to the fields, and knowing that while not in the kind of near-term future, that this edge of our site wants to be kind of planning for, or maybe anticipating that there could be this more active edge in the future. Nevertheless, for the short term, we know that this edge of our site wants to sort of respond to those concerns about safety and about lighting, and about providing more program along that edge instead of kind of a blank facade or a dead end when it comes to our project. The excuse me, the existing streetscape, so snapped right out of Google Street View, the here New Street viewed from the south, the fields beyond, here noticing our project site rising up, currently an asphalt parking lot, but then seeing again the way that there's development that's happening along the kind of north edge of New Street that is setting the tone for some of the scale that can happen along this site. Here along from the north, seeing, I think just to help show the way that the fields are lifted up so high above New Street, that it's this really kind of unique condition for us to be designing against, and thinking about how that elevated recreational field can inform the program of our building. And then as we start to think a little bit more towards what kind of the character of a building might be, here looking sort of at the existing character of the neighborhood, how these buildings that are starting to grow up in scale from the smaller scale residential neighborhoods, how are those being treated? Are there maybe some more even industrial type materials that can be applied at a larger scale? And then last, I think, be remiss if I did not mention the Baker dorms at MIT, which have this great effect of providing what is a fairly large building, how you treat that, where they're looking out onto kind of a recreational expanse there, the Charles River and Memorial Drive, but we have the opportunity to create a similar kind of gesture potentially at Dennehy Fields. So the design inspiration, where we've kind of, where we maybe take our designer's eye and try to look towards what the project could be. This is just our take. So we're really eager to hear maybe what other ideas you may have for us, what other kind of parts of your neighborhood we haven't considered yet. But this is just maybe a first taste of what sets up the second community meeting. So you'll come and join us again on March 25th. So the first, as mentioned, there's sort of our site has its own natural kind of natural exposures and natural conditions. Here, seeing that we're keeping in mind the solar arc and how we can ensure that our units have great southern light, how we're ensuring that any units that aren't facing south aren't sort of constrained by their solar orientation, keeping in mind that, of course, we have the great expanse of the Dennehy Fields, but then even at higher levels of our project, maybe we'll have some views of the skyline or even views of Fresh Pond beyond. So thinking back towards far earlier in our presentation, when I think the word unremarkable kind of jumped out at us, and it was this moment that we kind of understood when we were looking at the existing conditions of the site as well. But every site, every building has a site, and there is a desire, I think, on our part for the building to feel like it's a part of its site. So in our research, as we were digging through kind of the neighborhood and starting to understand the conditions of the site, we found this great section diagram, which is from a brochure that was created for the Dennehy Fields. And what this is showing is the strata of the park and kind of its history in sort of the geography of the site and how it sort of came to be. So as I mentioned earlier, it was a clay pit. It was excavated to create the bricks, which created much of the structures of the city. It became a landfill for a good number of years. It provided a place for the fill from the MBTA when they were doing the expansion from Harvard out to Alewife, and then became sort of this platform for the fields. So it's this kind of almost like a living history of Cambridge, of some part of Cambridge, and showing the way that it's transitioned and evolved throughout the years. So thinking about that, each layer sort of necessitating and becoming necessary for the next, whereas the clay became this excavation, it became sort of this natural place for, we know better now, but we sort of placed the landfill sort of, it was convenient and it was a place for us to place this waste. We're trying to look at that as maybe this idea of it representing a collective point that shows kind of the idea of the many cultures and the many peoples of Cambridge. All of our kind of content is held here. Although it's a landfill, it is kind of still, it's this kind of a time capsule that represents the diversity of Cambridge. Then looking at the utility as the city's expanding, as it's reaching out towards the north and the west, it becomes this natural place for the MBTA to store their fill, but it also becomes sort of a symbol of the expanding city of Cambridge kind of growing outside of its smaller bounds. And then finally, I think the idea that it was this perfect place for the city of Cambridge, it could have become many things, but it became a park. It became kind of the vision of something that was accessible for all. It became something about recreation, and there's even educational components that talk about sustainability and renewability. So it now is this great living symbol of what kind of you can do when you have these former industrial now turned into something that's kind of a living, breathing symbol of what the city aspires to be. So we are taking that and we're sort of extracting from that these components that we see informing our own project. So there's, whereas you had the clay pit, we have a very utilitarian foundation that we need to create. We have strong issues of resiliency on the site. We have this really concern that the ground level of our building has to be very highly performative. you take this idea of what was a landfill, maybe think about that as the kind of eclectic multiculturalism of Cambridge. So we're looking to house, all types of people. We're looking to use this project as an opportunity for all cultures to sort of find their step and find their footing. The urban fill, thinking about that maybe as looking to hold some kind of program and economy. We know that these family units, which are 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, but weighted, as Craig mentioned, towards 2 and 3 bedrooms, about 75% will be larger units. Those still need to have a kind of economy and efficiency to them in order to meet the affordability guidelines. And then last, this idea of a building that is extremely high performing, that we're designing towards passive house standards. And that becomes, in a sense, this kind of decorative skin that is embodied in the physical form of the architecture itself. So this is a way just for us to start thinking about how we're ensuring that our building sort of embodies the values of the site itself and is really becoming a part of the city. And there's a way for us to express that through the architecture. So a few bullet points just to recap. I can allow people to sort of read through those on their own, but I think really obviously what might seem at first sort of an uninspiring site does have a ton of character, a ton of quality. There's a lot of complexity and constraints that we're working with, but that there is also a lot of kind of vision from the city in those Envision Cambridge plans, the vision for multimodal transit, for pedestrian and for bike activity. So there's a lot for us to handle, a lot for us to work with, but then a lot set up for us by the city and by the affordable housing overlay to guide us as we move forward. So that is where we are, and that is, I can turn it over now, I think, to Craig.
Thanks, Ben. So we're almost done. Just a quick thing about where this project is in the timeline, and then we'll get to the questions and answers. We've already gotten a few, so we're looking for that. There's a lot of bullet points here. I think the thing that we're looking at is that, there's lots of time in this project before we start any sort of construction. There's this meeting, there's the second community meeting, which will be March 25th. There's the third community meeting, which will be April 15th. There's the public meetings with the Planning Board and the Affordable Housing Trust. So there's ample opportunities to continue to voice your questions and comments and help guide us through this. In addition to the meetings that we're having, we also have the website 52newstreet.org, where we'll post updates, we'll post pictures, we'll pose questions and polls and things of that nature, again, to gather that information that helps inform and guide us through this process. So next slide. Which puts us at the questions and comments section. So, we spent a lot of time here kind of going through how we've learned about the site and what we're seeing as part of the neighborhood and the community that our site stands in, but we want to make sure we're not missing anything from the people that are actually in this community and in this neighborhood. And then on our website, we had asked a question about kind of community priorities. And, again, if there are ones that you want to make sure that we're considering as we go through this process, by all means, feel free to post it here or post it on the website. Again, if you have a question, click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, type it in, hit send. I'll be able to see them, and then I'll go through and answer as many as we can. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. That being said, if I don't get to a question during this session, I will be posting a recap of all the Q&A. So every question asked, whether it was answered in the session or not, will be answered and posted up on the website, along with the recording of this this session and the presentation. So all of those things will be up and available on the website within a matter of days. So with that, I'm going to start taking questions. The first one is asking whether or not the slides will be available, and yes, they will. They'll be up on the website, 52newstreet.org. So that one is good. Another question was, why not units with 4+ bedrooms, especially for large families? That is a great question. I think it's something that as we go further into the building and look at size and space constraints, we can definitely see where that might be possible. We've found generally that 1, 2s, and 3s are of the largest demand. So having those much larger ones can sometimes be a little tricky, but we'll definitely take a look. And then the other question we have is in regards to the gym. So Evolve Fitness is on site, and at this point we have extended, actually renewed and extended their lease through December of 2021. I did mention that we view a small commercial space being available on the site. We're not exactly sure how big that space is. And one of the things that we will, want the feedback on is what would be the best use of that site. Overall, it's the goal is to have something that fits with the neighborhood and fits into the community. So, see, next question. Are you planning to use gas at all in the building? At this point, we're looking at all options. We are going with a passive house mentality. We will primarily use electric for cooking and heating and whatnot. We're not sure if we'll have gas at this point, but we're not ruling it out either. But we'll continue to address that and look at it as we go through the process. Ben, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, we've brought on a passive house consultant to help advise us on various, not only just of course, the envelope of the building so that we can ensure that it's a very high performing building, but then also to help us evaluate a number of different approaches to how we can provide the utilities to the units, whether we're going with a centralized system or individual systems, and they're really helping us evaluate how they perform from an energy standpoint. So I think that's what's mostly guiding our standpoint on that. And so we haven't ruled out gas for some form of power for some form of utility for the units.
Okay, next question is access to disability community. I'm assuming that is in relation to accessibility for people to visit and live there. Ben, do you want to go into what we will incorporate for that?
Yes, so we're designed for all the units to be visitable. So there's a number of meet in order to qualify for various affordable housing funding sources. And so those already require us to have, there's a percentage of units in the building which will have expanded accessibility. So they'll have increased reach ranges, they'll have kind of access for wheelchair, turning radiuses. So a certain number of units will have that extra level of accessibility for residents who are living there. But then we'll also be ensuring that all spaces within the building will meet sort of standard ideas about thresholds, about sort of door opening clearances, push buttons, and other various components. There'll be an elevator in the building, so all spaces in the building will sort of meet those levels of movement and accessibility for visitors.
And I'll throw in, we expect a small playground in the back of the, somewhere on site for the children that live there. And the equipment that goes into that playground will also allow for some accessibility options. So let's see, next question. Although we are still in the early stage, I mentioned that we expect, roughly 110 units, 110 units. And the question is, of those 110, how many would be considered kind of a bonus that we're able to do because the overlay passed? And that's a great question. Actually, when we bought the property back in January of 2020, we've owned it for just over a year now. The overlay hadn't passed. So we kind of did the analysis of, if it didn't pass, how would we approach this building? And I think our calculation came, even with the inclusionary density bonus, to be roughly 80 units. So we're talking a good 20 to 30 additional units because of the overlay. not to mention the more streamlined process than going through a 40B comprehensive permit process. At what point do you expect to have a proposed design? We will be unveiling what we think would be a good fit for the site at our March 25th meeting. How many parking spots and would they be underground? We are shooting to maintain that 0.4 parking ratio that Ben mentioned. They will be underneath the building. They will not be below grade. Obviously, we don't want to dig too much into what used to be a landfill for obvious reasons. So we're going to keep it at grade, but definitely below the building. All right, let's see. Design. The existing residential buildings on New Street are not so beautiful. Can you design so as not to replicate their design? Ben?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I think subjective, but yeah, I mean, we're not looking certainly to replicate them or to make it feel like they're of the same kind as that of those structures. I think we have our own visions for what the project can be, but certainly where we haven't settled on any kind of design for the facades yet necessarily. But I think, yeah, we don't feel the need to match the projects across the street. I think we feel that we're finding inspiration, as you saw, from other places, and I don't expect it'll take us in that same direction as the buildings that exist on New Street.
And in addition to that, you know, that is a place where we expect the community to provide us feedback. So I mentioned we'll be unveiling kind of the shape of a building that we would envision for this site at our March 25th meeting. You know, we'll expect comments then. We'll have stuff on our website. There'll be ample opportunity for you to kind of let us know if you know, we're heading in the right direction. Okay, wondering how you think the site relates to the park. How can the building make Danahy Park better? I'm going to let Rashmi and Ben take this one as well.
Huge question. I think that's one of the most important questions that we have. And especially the fields have so many components to them. I think we, the recreational fields that are up above, we even had heard at one point that maybe a little bit of shade could be great at a corner of that, whereas those fields can bake in the middle of the sun. We're keeping in mind that our project has maybe a lot of program components to it, that there's not just the units, but there's going to be support spaces for the units. We think that there will be some common spaces for the residences and whatever this commercial space is that might be in the project. So knowing that those can all be kind of eyes, new activity, excuse me, that we're starting to create more of an engaging edge along this park that doesn't really exist at the moment. That kind of path that loops its way around at grade, that is the vent trench. When visiting the site, it felt like it was a little bit of dark and a little bit unsafe. So know that our project can create some kind of activity along the edge and maybe bring a little bit of safety and a bit of light to that condition. I think the fields in a lot of ways is going to make our project better. So I think that there's going to be this kind of way that it's impacting us more so than maybe we'll be impacting it. But I do see it as just this great kind of invaluable presence adjacent to our project. Rashmi, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to also say that, you know, as Ben had mentioned, the height of the park is at approximately at sort of the second floor of where our building would be. So how our building meets the ground, and, you know, we're working hopefully with the landscape architect to begin to really not have the edge be monolithic, but really kind of broken up so that, or, you know, have a scale to it that's terraced or tapered or some way in which how it meets the ground is equally influenced by the park and has kind of green verdant edge. So it's conceptual at this point. We really have to work through it, but it's something that's sort of been on our list of priorities.
Yeah, and I'll even add that you know, the concept of a multimodal path along the edge between our site and the park is something that we're definitely considering as we site the building and do that stuff, and kind of that edge and the landscaping and the context of our site next to the park, that that potential path is also something that we're keeping in the back of our heads, and making sure whatever we do, you know, can integrate and fit into that, you know, if and when it's done. All right. This area seems to be in transition with new apartments on New Street and smaller multifamily structures on Bay State. Your site is pretty much in between those two. Are there some design features that can help connect the two areas in some way?
That's great. Yep, great question. And the proportions of our site are such that, you know, it's 400 feet long and it's 100 feet wide, and there's no residential building that would naturally fit within those proportions. So I think there's definitely, in some way, we've been thinking about this project as not really having much of a back to it, because there's the New Street edge, which wants to be kind of setting up the street wall and be about maybe the vision of what New Street can be. There's the long edge along the fields that we know wants to engage the park, be respectful of the kind of scale of that. But then, as mentioned, at the rear of our site, which is really just facing onto Bay State Road, there is much smaller scale buildings along that edge. So we know that the view from Bay State Road is something that will be sort of perceived for a long time, and we want to make sure that our building is respectful of that edge as well. So I think there's ways that we can handle with massing, whether there's steps in height or whether there's material changes, so that you don't get the sense sort of what the height of the building is. A lot of those pieces are stuff that we're starting to consider as we're making our way there.
Yeah, that really is the big urban design challenge, is how to scale the building appropriately and have insets. You know, this is in the affordable housing overlay guidelines as to, you know, how do you break down a large scale building, and that sort of begins to answer some of the next question as well, is how can we not have the same height throughout? How can we build in courtyards and rooftop terraces and so on? So hopefully next presentation will begin to show you some of the strategies we're hoping to adopt to be able to connect, or at least have a conversation with both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, will you provide a green roof and or solar? There's kind of a multifaceted question, but it's all seemingly related. Any rooftop patio? How much open space is able to be used by the tenants? Would there be balconies overlooking the field? Will there be a outdoor kind of barbecue picnic area as well as the play area? There's kind of, you know, I think the gist of the conversation or the question is, you know, green and resilient, but also open space and the ability for the residents there to take advantage of being outside within the building and within the site without having to just rely on, say, the park next door. Guys?
Okay. I think we're definitely where, you know, there's a density of units here, and we want to ensure that there are amenities for those units. I don't think we have quite a number on what those all are yet, but we know that there will be, as I think as was mentioned, maybe some kind of an area designated at grade that could be kind of a playground or a sort of a kids area. We've thinking a lot about how the New Street edge, we can kind of make sure that our building's pulled back just a bit so that there's some kind of a plaza or gathering space where there's the ability to sort of land, pull off from the sidewalk, have a view of the front door, and have kind of this, you know, respite from the street. We're talking about on maybe the elevated level, maybe likely level 2, that is a great moment to have kind of outdoor space that's on top of what might be the parking, where you can have something connected to an amenity for the tenants. And definitely on the roof, I think we're already thinking that we will naturally have kind of a large roof. So designating a portion of that towards photovoltaic is something that we are strongly considering at this time.
Yeah, to have a variety of open spaces is the conversation we've had with our landscape architect, so that especially if the last year has revealed anything to us, there's just the fact that open space actually has to check a variety of boxes. And so we're really trying to understand how, we can have spaces for gathering spaces, for recreation spaces, for, being able to have some distance from each other. So just thinking about this in a more mindful way. And our landscape architect is really excited about doing this. So hopefully in future designs, some of those will be more evident.
Okay, well, we're at 7:05, so pretty much right on time, and we're out of questions at the moment. So I think, for where we are and what we're showing at this point, I think this has been great. The questions that we got are fantastic, and I think we're looking forward to addressing these and moving things forward. I want to thank everybody for showing up. The attendance was fantastic, and we really appreciate everyone spending time with us. And let's see. So the next event is really March 25th. It'll be at 6 o'clock as well. It'll be a virtual meeting, given the state of the world. And at that meeting is where we will show kind of an initial layout of what a building might look like on this site. And we're really looking forward to showing that to you, and again, getting the feedback and kind of input from the community that we're really looking forward to hearing. So as I mentioned earlier, the recording, the slides, as well as the recap of the questions and answers will be up on the website shortly. And again, thank you everybody for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.